Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, a Karen demands I sell my property to the HOA, insisting that I must join the HOA, otherwise there will be consequences. Let's dive right into the video. So this story happened in South Africa. I feel like many of the HOA horror stories on here take place in America, so I decided to remind all of you that Karens do not have borders and can appear in any country to cause HOA chaos. When I moved to my current neighborhood, there was no HOA and nobody seemed to have a problem with that fact. Sure, once in a while, a neighbor would be a little loud late at night, but we did the adult thing and just talked to people about our issues directly. One time my neighbor had a tendency to like to mow their lawn on Saturday very early. I explained to him that I get home from work at 11 p.m. on Friday and asked if he could maybe mow his lawn at a different time. He did, and the problem was solved with no third-party involvement. There was also nobody really doing anything illegal around, but I imagine if they did, we would call the police and they would take care of it like a normal neighborhood. We were functioning perfectly fine until Karen and some other people moved in. Now, I wouldn't say Karen had friends exactly. These people ended up being on the eventual HOA board with her, but I wouldn't say that they were her friends. It was like Karen was some villain from a bad 80s movie and the other HOA board members were like her minions. Not once could you speak to one of them about something because they would just tell you to talk to Karen. They did not think for themselves and it was kind of scary now that I think about it, but I need to back up because I got a little carried away. So Karen moved in and decided that the neighborhood needed an HOA. She seemed shocked that one was not in place and talked about how all South African neighborhoods have them and we were living in the Stone Age unless we had one too. I didn't know too much about how she got it off the ground, I just remember 2 different times being spoken to by Karen and her minions. The first was talking about making an HOA and if I wanted to sign for my support basically, I declined that offer despite the clearly scripted speech she was giving me. Talking about why HOAs are good and that they build a strong community and keep things in order. I feel like if I went right now to Google and typed what is an HOA for, I would probably get the exact speech that she gave to me and everybody else. The second was after the HOA was approved and asking me to sign a contract to join it. I could not be forced into it because I was already living here, I didn't want to join and it honestly was not an issue against HOAs as a whole. I feel like here in South Africa we have less horrible ones than in some other countries that seem to dominate these pages. I just knew what kind of person Karen was from our short interactions already and that I didn't want to belong to anything where she was going to be in control. It was a recipe for disaster. If you're like me, you would have been very curious how she got enough support because I was far from the only person not into the whole HOA idea. Of course, she did things a sneaky way, especially with the older members of the neighborhood. I would not be shocked if they didn't know what they were signing or did not know enough about HOAs to be worried about potential fines and the control Karen would actually hold over them. Without that, the HOA idea would have probably been dead in the water since we were doing perfectly fine without one. We had a strong bond as a community already and there were no issues to solve or things we needed. Karen clearly did not like that some people were not jumping on board and having only some control was not going to be enough for that woman. She needed full control or her head would explode or something. She was clearly a narcissist feeding on the HOA power and the fact that she had minions listening to her every word. Instead of common tactics to try and convince me to join, she had another idea the next time we spoke. Karen, I hear that you have no plans to join the HOA. Me, nope. I'm perfectly happy not being a part of it. Karen, listen, you have 2 choices. The easier of them would be to sign the contract and just join the HOA. We want to do good here and everybody should want to be a team player. Me, it's not about being a team player, it's me not wanting to spend money on something I don't need to follow rules that I've no say in. Then you need to sell the HOA your house and leave. She further said, let a nice family move in that will be part of the HOA and get with the program. Me, if you think you're going to make me leave, then you have a long wait ahead of you. And considering the wrinkles on your face, I expect to be around here a lot longer than you. Karen, how dare you insult me? I promise that if you don't join or sell your property, then you will not like what happens next. Me, the only thing happening next is you getting away from my door. I could not believe the nerve of her to threaten me because I didn't want to join the HOA. I talked to some friends and they had gotten the same kind of speech from Karen too. She was making the rounds and trying to scare people. Turns out that Karen was a little more serious than I thought and she hired people to harass me. They would call my phone and leave messages about joining the HOA, post things on my front door, etc. They also ruined my yard with a note that said it would not happen if I had the HOA to protect me. I would not budge, so they went one step further. The HOA was also sending me official notices. They were giving me fines, claiming that even if I don't join the HOA, my house is still a part of it and subject to fines. Also sending more threats like Karen had said to me in person that day. I was not caving in and letting Karen get her way just because she really wanted it. So that was when she took it a step too far with the people she had hired. I had ordered some food, so when the doorbell rang, I assumed that it was that. Instead though, it was the guys who had been harassing me, and they forced their way into my home. They started tearing up the place and actually assaulted me. It was not like I was dying, but it was enough to scare the crap out of me and want to get checked out at the hospital. What Karen did not know is that I had cameras in my house, so I was able to check on my cats while I was at work. It basically caught everything. And when I was at the hospital, the police came and spoke to me about what actually happened. They thought it was just some kind of break-in, but I had to explain the entire story and that Karen was the real person behind all of this. The video was great because the guys didn't even try to hide their faces and the police were able to find and arrest them. They went to some bar afterwards and the police picked them up on charges of breaking and entering and assault and battery. They were quick to roll over on Karen when told they could get a deal for a lighter sentence. They admitted that Karen had paid them to do everything. Now, I was filing a lawsuit against Karen, the HOA as a whole, and of course the thugs that attacked me. I will get the thugs over with first while I'm still talking about them. It was pretty basic that they were facing charges, but giving up Karen helped them out a lot. From their criminal histories, they were for sure going to prison for a while, but the criminal system had more interest in the person who actually hired the thugs to begin with. Karen, of course, was denying everything and getting a fancy and expensive lawyer in order to defend herself. The HOA, led by Karen, was being defended with that same lawyer, but there were two separate lawsuits since the HOA is its own entity, even though Karen is in charge of it. She went with the method of trying to deny everything and claiming that I am crazy and making the entire thing up. She started claiming that I was a stalker who wouldn't leave her alone and she had only hired those thugs to protect her. Apparently, I was obsessed and wanted to be with her so badly that she feared what I was gonna do. Not enough to tell the police or have any kind of actual evidence of that fact, of course. Plus, the thugs giving a totally different story. Her minions did not really know what to do, and it was clear that they were going down with the sinking ship that was Karen. They were being asked if they sent me any letter, and they denied doing so, despite my evidence having HOA letters with their signatures on it. They were asked if they knew Karen had hired the thugs, despite the fact that the payment for the thugs came from one of the other board members' bank account. The entire thing was a crap show, and as you can guess, the court was siding with me on every single point. Karen and the HOA were both being charged with multiple counts of harassment, extortion, assault, and even more. All of them were going to end up spending time in jail, at least, with Karen getting the biggest sentence out of everybody as being the clear ringleader of everything. Without them, the HOA was shut down, and they were ordered to give people money back that they had taken from them. Well, it turns out they were giving out fake fines and actually getting money for it. Money they had to pay back out of pocket because their HOA bank account was empty. Why, you might ask? Because Karen was dumb enough to pay her fancy lawyer with HOA money, which is just a whole different legal issue that she was going to have to deal with now. Without an HOA, the neighborhood pretty much stayed exactly the same. Them being there didn't really do anything aside from the problems that they caused. So with them gone, things were back to how they should have been the entire time. With people being friendly and just acting the way adults should without the need of threats or fines. And the next one is titled, "Tenant ran an illegal growing operation on my dad's property." And before we jump in, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we are getting closer and closer to 130,000 subscribers. Thank you so much in advance. Your help is very much appreciated. This one was posted by user mediumsavings4968 on r/ripe stories. So I got permission from my dad to tell this story, and we have permission from both lawyers and authorities to go somewhat public. So here we go. My father owns a secluded rental property in the northwestern tip of the USA. My father himself lives in California, and what we own is 3 acres of property with a house that sits on it and 2 acres of lightly wooded area. Originally, the house was bought to be a fun vacation spot, but when the housing bubble popped, my dad had to pivot to it being a rental property. Fast forward to 2018, my dad takes on his latest tenant after getting a recommendation from someone he knew in the area. Last time that'll ever happen, by the way, a guy we will call Rick. Rick was what you call a laid-back surfer-style millennial. He always had this very eclectic dress style that mixed country mountain man meets rasta. In 2019, my dad's original property manager decided to retire and we got a new lady. Dad, being the meet first before hiring, made 2 trips up there with my mom when my mom was still alive to meet with the new company. The new property manager told us she'd have my dad's best interests in mind and helped us with the property. Well, then 2020 hit, and as we all know, the great virus hit us all. Meanwhile, our tenant Rick begins to slow his rental payment. First it's a late one, then it's another late again, to which my dad forgave the late fees, then it started becoming missed rent payments. My dad got a call from the property management company property manager. "Have you heard from the tenant recently? We have not received payments for this month and we are closing in on a second." My dad sighing, "I will see what I can do." My dad hung up and called the guy, and they had a call. Rick acted like they were the best of friends and a missed payment is nothing to be big over. He would send a check right now via certified mail, the end of the month comes by, no check to dad or the property company, and when my dad called him, Rick blamed the property management company for being behind. After dad video called the property manager company, our property manager blamed Rick for non-payment. My dad got angry with Rick at that moment. He then conference called Rick with the property manager on the line. "Rick, it's the pandemic, man. My job just fizzled out, man, but I'll make you both whole. Just give me a couple days." Property manager, "Sir, I'm gonna suggest to the owner that we reevaluate the billing and convert to a month-to-month contract at the next renewal." Rick, "I said both of you, it's not my fault. You gotta hear me out. I said I get you next month." That's all my dad was able to hear, and he was too pissed. This was feeling too much like this guy was out to scam my dad out of it. Days go by, no payment, weeks go by, no payment, and finally my dad's had all he can take, so he calls Rick for one last demand of payment. "Dad, Rick, we are at our 4 month of non-payment. I'm going to have to evict you." Rick, "Look, your money's gonna be there today. I'll hand it to her myself. You just gotta relax on this, man." Dad, "With the late fees, we're now talking 4K. You got that kind of money." Rick, "Listen, man, it's no issue. You will hear from me today." My dad, "Video call me when you make your payment." Rick never called. My dad called the next day to the property management company. The lady goes by her office, checks for the payment envelope. Nothing. She checks the footage on the mail slot. Dad called Rick and dad got instantly voicemail. Blocked. So then my dad tries to file an eviction notice, but the courts are closed and with a mandate it could not be executed yet. So my dad had to bide his time. Each time my dad had the property management send an updated past due notice to the guy, each time adding and making Rick's bill larger. Fast forward 6 months later, with persistence, dad got this thing to go to court. Rick got the summons, Rick blew up dad's phone with dozens of angry text messages, and my dad sent a process servant to serve the notice, and meanwhile he sent his property manager to check out the property. Dad got a video call, one he'll never forget. Property manager, "Well, I never. Mr. Dad, I was just thrown off your property by that idiot. I think he has gone nuts. He refused me entry and said the property was his, that he could not be evicted. I also took a minute to look around. I'm not sure, but something is up here. I saw what I believed was an illegal shed in the back. Did you give him permission to build that?" Dad, "No, definitely not." Dad had a hunch, and being this type of thing happened before, my dad decided to try his luck. Both he and I both flew out to the property on the first plane possible. We asked the neighbor if we could approach and enter our property from the back via their property. Our property neighbor had no issue and even went as far as offering us the use of his vehicle. We got to know the guy before we started renting the property out. We drove 20 minutes around the neighbor's property and then snuck onto the back. We saw a carefully set up area. I cautioned my dad to slowly walk in fear of traps or cameras. We stopped in the distance of what we saw, jaws dropped, and we were so shocked. Our tenant had a field of plants set up, except these plants are not exactly legal. He had cleared, tilled and been farming nearly most of an acre into his own growing operation. I'm being vague, but many of you can guess what kind of plant is used for smoking, both medicinal or recreational, hint hint, and now local law allowed you to have a few plants, but this was a full-on field. You could have mistaken our tenant for a sharecropper. There were rows and rows, all well tended. My dad and I snapped pictures from a distance. We got in the vehicle and drove back the way we came. We then drove to my dad's rental property and called Rick out. The guy acting all fake humble came out and tried to have a conversation with my dad. Dad didn't buy it for a second and kept his hands to himself without shaking hands. He then told the guy, "Let's just keep this professional, okay?" The guy gave the same excuses, talked about his new job prospects, and he just needed more time. He then tried to barter to lower the prices. My dad wouldn't have it, and my dad said, "See you in court." Rick did not show up in court and we got a default judgment. We got a sheriff and his deputy involved. My dad tried to get this done civilly by asking that the deputy do do this friendly-like, the deputy came back an hour later pissed off. According to the sheriff's deputy, Rick barred himself in the house. So the deputy would need help. My dad unlocked his phone and showed the photos of the illegal growing going on. The sheriff looked really interested. Sheriff, well, that's why he's desperate. Please send us the pictures and I'll make some calls. I'd also like any other information you have on this guy. A couple days later, the sheriff said, "We got a warrant now to enter arrest and at the worst evict him. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. We also had another interesting development." It seems this guy has priors to the same crime. A team alongside the sheriff went out to the house. They ended up using a battering ram to open the door. The place was raided. Rick and his partner, a lady, was under arrest. Rick was screaming profanity to the sheriff. At first it was him screaming. It was an illegal entry, an illegal search. Heck, he tried stating that he had seen the judge and he was granted to stay on the property. As soon as the sheriff asked if he had the paperwork from the supposed judge, well, then he changed to pleading, saying he'd pay his rent up to day, while Rick was debating with the sheriff. The remaining officers were conducting a search and seizure on the backlot. They found his little acre of illegal farming. They found in the shed he built his drying product. We didn't even get the property back until the sheriff and deputies had to comb it for more paraphernalia. They had to search the house for 2 days before finally turning the property back to us. We checked the house and the house was trashed. It was a total pigsty. Luckily my dad's insurance would cover the damages to repairs. The property manager already had a demo team come by to knock down the shed. Cleanup took almost a month while a contractor started work on the repairs. Meanwhile my dad contacted his lawyer. The lawyer began the long process of suing Rick. Rick was then served while he was sitting in jail. We just ended the civil case earlier this year, so we sued him for legal costs, loss of rent, unpaid rent and late fees and repairs. His bill was $21,000. Edit: I forgot to mention the criminal charges and consequences. So illegal cultivation, illegal possessions of an exuberant amount, illegal distribution, totaling 7 years federal pen and $75,000 in restitution. And by the way, our lawyer is not the only lawyer he's gonna need to face. The insurance company is preparing to pounce on him as well. We were putting the house on the market to be rid of it. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Big revenge. A few years back, I had my identity stolen right in the middle of a mental health crisis. I was already stressed out and overwhelmed by life, and the identity theft just made everything worse. Suddenly, random purchases like iPhones and laptops were showing up on my bills, purchases I had never made. The identity thief opened credit cards with my identity, bank accounts, you name it. The authorities were of course no help, and I felt very alone in this twisted game of whack-a-mole, where every time I thought I had fixed one problem, another popped up. I even had a rental car company come after me as the thief had rented a car in my name and then stolen it. Of course, this was a blow to my credit as well, and resolving the whole thing was enormously stressful. Eventually I had frozen my accounts, contested the charges, cancelled the credit cards and followed all of the appropriate steps. All that was left to do was close the fraudulent bank account. When I went to do so, however, I was met with a snag. I explained the situation to the bank, which was not a bank I personally used, and requested they close the account. They told me that they could not just delete the account, however, as there was still money in it, approximately $800, which would need to be withdrawn. I explained that that was not technically my money, and they replied that the account could not be closed with the money remaining inside. An account that I opened in which I, Corvidius, put my money. So guess who is $800 richer? After all the identity thief took from me, it seemed like appropriate recompense and only fair to take a little something back. And the next one is titled, Check Out Revenge. So I was reading another post on here that reminded me of a petty act of revenge I did a while back. I had popped into my local supermarket for a few essentials. It was pretty busy, but I had noticed that the self-checkout queues tended to have folks with only a few items each. So while the queue was longer, it was flowing quicker. I only had a handful of items myself, so I joined the queue. In this particular supermarket there were 8 self-checkout machines, with the middle pair being back-to-back, think 2 squares side by side. Each square had its own queue, both being roughly the same length. I was stood in the queue for the right-hand side square. I was 3 places from the front of the queue when a woman approached from the left, spotted an empty checkout that the person at the front of the left queue was just picking up their basket to go to, and then cut straight in front of everybody. Now, if she was just scanning a sandwich and a drink, I don't think anybody would have been too bothered, but she had a trolley full of stuff, so she would be there for a while. Being British, nothing more was said other than some mild tutting. Anyway, as it was my turn to check out my items, I noticed the machine I was using was directly opposite the woman who had cut in line earlier. She had just about finished scanning everything, which had taken a little while given how much stuff she had. I also noticed that the power switches for the self-checkouts were very much in range of my feet. Whoever had laid out the store had handily written the numbers 6 and 7 on the plugs, which corresponded to the number 6 on the back of her machine and assumedly the number 7 on the back of mine. As she had just bagged her last item, I gave the power switch a gentle kick. In the UK, all plug sockets have an individual switch that will shut off power to the socket. A confused reaction from the other side confirmed that the machine had shut down. Then flick the switch back on again, the machine starts booting up. She stood there with a puzzled look on her face, which swiftly turned to anger as she realized she would have to scan everything all over again. I don't know if the supermarket staff had seen me do what I did, but she called one of them over and he very dryly said, "The machine crashed. You will have to rescan your shopping once it's restarted or use a staff till. Make sure you remove your items from the bagging area first." She did not look particularly impressed at this and started swearing under her breath. I'm not very good at keeping a straight face, so I swiftly finished scanning my items and then left. By the time I had gotten to my car, it had been another couple of minutes and I purposely drove by the front of the shop. She was still scanning away. And the next one is titled Smoking Neighbor. So, the mother of all Karens lives next door and unsurprisingly, she is not very neighborly or considerate. She chain smokes every day in her back garden, approximately 2 meters away from my bedroom window, and it wafts over, leaving me unable to enjoy my garden, unable to open my windows in the summer, and unable to dry laundry in the garden as it ends up smelling like an ashtray. I have politely let her know that I have asthma and it is affecting my quality of life. I discussed that all I can do is kindly suggest that if she could ever smoke in her front garden instead if she sees my windows are open or that my washing is out, it would be greatly appreciated. There was no change to her behavior and she did not take it well. And then there is the glorious verbal abuse shouted over the fence at me. The one time I used my garden with friends, she complained about moderate noise of conversations and laughter at 8 p.m, yet said neighbor blares music on a weekly basis so loudly that I can hear the lyrics to the songs she is listening to. She regularly shouts over the fence that she is unhappy about the state of our landlord's garden, but as it is a rental property, I can only do so much to fix it. Last summer, the garden was covered like a jungle in out-of-control tall weeds and had a huge stack of rotten furniture from former tenants. I decided to do all the weeding, which was a horrendous task that took many grueling weekends of my own work. I had to tolerate her chain smoking while doing this task and it makes me feel quite ill. I also called my local council to collect the rotten furniture, paid for out of my own pocket. And when I was on the phone to the council sending the itinerary of items to be collected, said neighbor started abruptly shouting at me to shut up from her window. This was the only other occasion I have spoken audibly in my garden other than the time I had a few friends over for dinner. The revenge for the shouting? After the call, I audibly retorted, "So you don't want me to sort out the garden then, huh? Don't worry, after this I won't put down weed killer or do the garden again." Since that day, I've let the weeds get out of control. Only a year on, the garden looks like a jungle again, with human-high tree-like weeds sprouting everywhere and covering every inch of my garden. It looks like the garden of a haunted house and I know it will drive my neighbor mad, especially because she knows it is a result of her own actions. When she looks out of her window, the view of my horrible garden will ruin her perfect one. I can hear her muttering about it from time to time. Revenge for the chain smoking affecting my quality of life and basic enjoyment of my home? I may have found a delectable fart-scented spray called Liquid Ass I'm contemplating spritzing out the window and over the fence. Reviews online describe the product as revolting, overwhelming and strong enough to induce coughing and gagging. I am quite tempted to use it to encourage her to smoke in her front garden instead. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much and I will see you again tomorrow.